Okay. Welcome back, everyone. So good to see you. Um, Today we will be talking about hyperthyroidism, or somewhat translated or can be understood in the concept of bhasmaka or atyagni. Okay, and this is there in the notes. You guys have handouts for this. So I didn't prepare a separate PowerPoint. We're just going to talk regarding the notes that you have already. Okay, so let's get started. Yo Vishwam Vidadati Pati Satatam Samharayatyanjasa Srishtva Devyamahauschadischa Vividhan Duri Karotya Vibrano Jalana Chakasti Bhuvane Piyosha Purnam Ghatam Tam Dhanvantari Rupamishamalam Vandamahe Shreyase Vandamahe Shreyase Vandamahe Shreyase. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Okay, so we actually have discussed the topic of bhasmaka and or atyagni before. We had talked about it in the GI module because it is basically an issue looking at overactive Agni, and where it is not just at the level of Tikshna Agni, but it's one step above that. But we want to look at it, we're going over it again in this module, is because if we were to look at the condition of hyperthyroidism, it's very similar to Bhasmaka. And what we have advised when we were looking at it as just a digestive issue, we looked at just how we would want to manage that through diet and lifestyle, where in this level where it is more manifesting as a vyadhi and it's a little bit more severe, same sort of samprapti, same sort of causative factors, but looking at it when it has even more of a systemic effect and much more severe symptoms, then it's the same condition, just more advanced. So in looking at it from the perspective of hyperthyroidism, in that situation, the treatment can be a little bit more aggressive as well. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to see how we can actually correlate, or why the condition of hyperthyroidism does correlate quite well with bhasmaka or atyagni roga. Okay? So hyperthyroidism is a condition where the thyroid gland becomes overactive and it starts to produce excessive amounts or high amounts of thyroxine hormone, or actually T4. That's the particular hormone that tends to be in a much larger quantity. And what this does is this in turn increases the body's metabolism. Not just like a healthy increase of metabolism, but it becomes overactive. So because of a very, very high overactive metabolism, the patient tends to present with signs and symptoms such as sudden weight loss. Even though that they have an increased appetite, they're still losing weight. So which means they have an increased appetite, they're consuming lots of food because of it, but even though they're consuming high quantities of food, they're still losing weight. Okay, so which means the input is not really representative of the nourishment. So the input is high, but the nourishment is still low. The person also tends to exhibit with a high heart rate, which can be irregular heart rate, or it can also be in the form of palpitations. They also exhibit nervousness, anxiety, or irritability, and that's basically, again, because of the excessive metabolism and the sort of accelerated effect of Agni, and also the accelerated effect systemically. Okay, they can also present with tremors or sweating, changes in menstrual patterns, especially in women. So women may present with either irregular menstrual cycles or lack thereof. Maybe it can get to the point of amenorrhea as well. And also there may be increased sensitivity to heat, frequent bowel movements, or even IBS type of symptoms. Enlarged thyroid gland, which is very similar to goiter, and fatigue, muscle weakness, skin thinning, and protruding swollen eyes. So if you look at these particular symptoms, hopefully this has started to create an idea in your mind as to what sort of dosha balance it is. Because again, what, as Charaka says, if you don't have a name for the disease, you go by the signs and symptoms according to the doshas, which we do know. And by looking at these signs and symptoms, it is predominantly, I would say, about 85 to 90% of these signs and symptoms are all attributed to aggravated vata, or excessive vata, or hyper-functioning of vata. So if we look at that, then this is very much similar to a Vataja disease. Now, how do we tell the difference between other Vataja diseases and this one, where we're looking specifically at Atyagni? Because as described even in modern literature, it is an increased metabolism or hyperactive metabolism, which very much is very similar to the condition of Bhasmaka or Atyagni. Bhasmaka literally means when the Agni is so high, or it has increased so much that it is incinerating the food that comes in. Or Atyagni also means, Ati means excessive, and Agni here is in reference to the Jatar Agni. So the Agni is so high that it actually is incinerating the nutrition in the food. Now, in this perspective, when we earlier had looked at it, we looked at it just as a digestive issue where certain people do have an overactive metabolism, so therefore they can't gain weight, which you do tend to find in a normal condition, especially with teenagers. And this we were talking about before as well, is that teenagers also present with the same sort of Atyagni because they have an increased metabolism as they are going through puberty. Can we see a connection here now? They're going through puberty. There is an excessive surge of hormones in their body, and that causes their metabolism to be increased. So therefore, they feel very hungry. They eat large quantities of food, but they do not gain weight from that food, which you do tend to find in a lot of teenagers, because those who are going through a normal, healthy transition from adolescence to, or from their younger age to they're going through puberty and going through the after pubescent age. Okay, so you do see these changes, and you do see this increase or rise of their metabolism and their appetite. Now, the difference between that and this is this gets, remember in the beginning, excuse me, I was saying that it's, remember I was saying that it's a difference between it being just a metabolic disorder as opposed to being systemic. Here, when we're comparing the same condition of Atyagni or Bhasmaka to hyperthyroidism, it's when it becomes more of a systemic issue, and you start to see it starting to affect multiple systems, and you start to see it affecting the whole body, as opposed to it being in a much milder presentation as you see in adolescence. Okay, so here, when it starts to affect the system, then you start to see other issues like palpitations, like anxiety and irritability and nervousness. You also start to see the issues with it obviously presenting in the GIT with the IBS or Grahani-like symptoms. And you also start to see other things like fatigue and muscle weakness and also protruding of the eyes. So as we had talked about over the weekend, if you look at it, this is actually affecting all of the sites of where Agni is at. You see, the eyes is also an area where Agni produces its hormones. I'm sorry, the eyes is the area where the Agni is responsible for its function. You also find that the Agni is responsible, of course, for the GIT and regulation of digestion and bowel movements. Of course, the Agni is responsible for the person's body temperature and their sensitivity to external heat or lack thereof. And Agni is, one of the indirect functions of Agni is also how it reflects and how it changes the normal or abnormal presentation of the menstrual cycle. So in multiple areas, in all of these signs and symptoms, we can again relate it back to the importance of Agni. And if it is imbalanced or if it is disturbed, it obviously starts presenting the symptoms in all these areas, okay? One thing we also find here as well is that just like hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism is also more common in women than in men. It tends to present more in women than in men. And in women, this usually, again, represents, or it tends to present as irregular menstrual cycles. And also, this is the difference between this one as opposed to in hyperthyroidism. It's here also you have an issue with irregular menstruation, and it can be amenorrhea, but here the symptoms are more associated with Vataja type of symptoms as opposed to in hypothyroidism, it's more associated with more Kaphaja type of symptoms, okay? So here, in this condition, as you said, it is similar to Basmaka Roga. It's also somewhat similar to Vataja Galaganda, which we remember we talked about Galaganda being a condition where they talk about a swelling that's present in the throat, and it tends to be more protruded, and it also exhibits very similar signs and symptoms. Okay, so both Vataja Galaganda and Basmaka Roga are sort of representative of this hyperthyroidism or hyperthyroid activity. Okay, so in looking at that, let's look at Bhasmaka Roga or Atyagni. In Charaka, it is termed as Atyagni. Bhasmaka Roga actually comes in some of the more recent Ayurvedic classical texts. So, for instance, you find it more in Madhavanidana or in Sharangadhara Samhita. They use the term Bhasmaka Roga. But it's both basically the same thing. They're synonyms for each other. So it is described as if a person with a diminished kapha and pitta located in the site of Agni get aggravated, then along with Vata, this aggravated pitta, not in its normal state, makes the Agni very strong, more than Tikshna Agni. And so because of the undernourishment in the body, along with aggravated Vata, the strengthened Agni surrounds the food, and because of its intensity, immediately digests the food, which is consumed frequently. After digestion of food, the strong Agni may also continue to break down the dhatus if the food is digested, not available for digestion. Thereafter, the patient becomes weak and may also result in death of all the dhatus if all the dhatus become depleted. Okay, so basically what this is saying, in the issue, now they haven't specifically mentioned what are the causative factors or what are the nidanas for this condition. The reason why, because here also the nidanas they're somewhat general. And the reason why it's looking at that is a person who leads more of a Vataja type of lifestyle, if they are more active and not just regular activity, but very hyperactive, if they tend to eat or consume foods that tend to aggravate more Vata, or for instance, if they start skipping meals and they are aggravating Vata in that sense. What this is doing, do you remember in the beginning when we talked about what quantifies or what regulates the Jataragni. Samana Vata, which is the Vata that is located in the stomach, is responsible for igniting the Jataragni. It is responsible for regulating the intensity of the Jataragni. So if the Samana Vata is very strong, it is the one that is responsible for exhibiting as Tikshna. If it is very low, it is that which is responsible for bringing on Manda Agni. If it is very irregular, sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's slow, that's how you end up with Vishama Agni. And if it is just at the right pace and a regulated, steady stream, that's how you end up getting Sama Agni. In this case, it is extremely strong. So it is very strong, so that's why it presents as beyond Tikshna Agni, it becomes Atyagni. Okay? So in that, what causes the Samana Vata to then present as Atyagni is all of the Vata aggravating diet and lifestyle. Because what first happens in this case is, first you have a Vata aggravating diet and lifestyle, which aggravates Vata, which causes a change in the flow and the movement of Vata. Vata tends to start to move much faster. And because of that accelerated high-paced movement of Vata, also all of the other functions of Vata become hyperactive. So that's why you see the hyperactive functions of Vata as well as the hyperfunction of Vata aggravating and influencing the Agni to become hyperactive as well. So in that process, it not only aggravates or causes an undue increase of the Agni, but it also aggravates Pitta as well. And that too more Pitta located in the stomach. Eventually, as the condition gets worse and worse, it can also cause the aggravated Pitta to be displaced from the stomach. So that's if it can also cause the Pachaka Pitta to be displaced. That's why in certain conditions, in certain people, they may end up with some amount of like acid reflux. And basically what acid reflux is as you would say, Vata pushing on Pitta. It literally, in this situation, is exactly that. It is Vata that is so aggravated that it displaces the Pitta off and it starts to burn in the Kaphaja region, where it actually does not belong. It has no function here. It doesn't need to be here. But what this excessive physical force and actual buildup of Vata displaces the Pitta and keeps pushing it upwards. So an easy example for you to think of this, or a very quick demonstration of how this happens. You ever notice, for instance, people who work in an office who don't really get a chance to eat, right? They don't get a chance to eat when they're hungry, or they tend to suppress their hunger. What happens is they're hungry, they don't eat, so the hunger keeps rising and rising and rising, and they eventually end up, the Vata keeps rising, the hunger goes up, and then it dies down. And that's basically because what happens is the Vata keeps moving up and up and up, and it ignites the Agni, but the Agni has nothing to burn off. And finally, there's so much of this Vata moving, the Vata is responsible for extinguishing the fire. So it causes it to then lower on its own. But the Vata keeps moving up because there's no physical substance in its way to push it back down. Or as we say, to ground the Vata, that's literally what it's doing. Not just physiologically, it's grounding the Vata, but also literally it grounds the Vata when you consume food. So if the person doesn't eat food, this aggravated Vata keeps moving up and up and up. And as it's moving it up, remember where we talked about where Pachaka Pitta gets secreted? It gets secreted in like the mid portion of the stomach, just I would say around the area of the edge or the lower tip of the sternum, which is sort of like the halfway point or the lower half point of where the stomach is. That's where Pachaka Pitta or the digestive enzymes or digestive fluid actually starts to get secreted. So as this vata is moving up, there is no food there for these enzymes and this pitta, the fluid pitta, to actually be to come across with it. So what this does is this pushes it up. And that's how they end up with this issue with reflux. So sometimes they don't feel it as much until after they eat. Because when they eat, that movement of the stomach actually causes it to be displaced. So instead of pushing it down further, it starts to move so hyperactively that it actually pushes that liquid pitta up. And the only reason it goes up is because it goes along with the vata. So it comes up as belching with that acidy sort of fluid. And they can actually feel a little bit of a burning fluid in the back of their throat. Okay, so this is what happens when that vata gets so aggravated and when the person isn't eating. Is this the same cause of a headache when one doesn't eat? Exactly. That is exactly the same cause of why people get a headache when they don't eat. And you notice that if it is a one-time thing, after they eat, if they eat and when they do get a chance to eat, and if they eat really well, then that settles it down. If you take a painkiller because you have a gas headache, or if you take any sort of something that's like analgesic, it still doesn't help. It doesn't work because it isn't an issue with actual pain receptors that's getting you the headache. The reason you have the headache is because the movement, the sheer movement and volume of vata that is giving you that headache. That's why that headache isn't stable. The headache keeps moving. You ever notice, like, you get the headache and you feel like it's here, then it's here, then it's here, then it's here. It doesn't sit one place. And that again indicates it's that vata. It's just aggravated vata that has risen till here, and it keeps moving all over the place. And the sheer pressure of that amount of air, that amount of vayu, is what creates the headache. And even if you take the analgesics, it doesn't really help. It just sort of dulls the sensation, but doesn't get rid of the headache. The only way to get rid of that kind of headache is to actually eat something, and eat something that is really heavy, that is really grounding. And what that grounding food will do is actually ground vata. Because vata it's starting from the colon, it's starting from the vata domain, and it's moving up. So as you eat the food, it helps to pull it back down and push it back down. Okay? So it's also somewhat of the same concept of what we're looking at, what's happening here. So if this happens on a one-day basis, it happens once, it happens twice, it happens 3 times, it's still fairly new, and it's not exhibiting the extent of all the symptoms we see here. But as this becomes more and more chronic, and as we have seen over the weekend, even a diet and lifestyle that seems, oh, well, this is just a regular everyday thing. Everybody does it. Nobody eats on time. Who's going to eat when they have the time? You eat when you get a chance. You eat when you get a break. But that does make a huge difference. Or, for instance, not eating and going for a run because you have the time. This is my window, so I'm going to go and exercise because I got a chance. I can't bother about eating right now. So on an empty stomach, going to run because they're thinking, oh, well, I'm probably going to lose more weight that way. So what they do is they do 2 things. This is an example of just 2 things. We have people, or our clients, if we start listing, have so many of these factors that are all contributed to aggravating vata, and they're all going on simultaneously. So how quickly this vata rises, and how quickly it starts to aggravate the agni, and it starts to aggravate pitta as well. So that's why you get most of the symptoms here are aggravated vata symptoms, and you do eventually end up with aggravated pitta symptoms as well. Okay? So that's why they say that and what typically happens in this, there's no kapha in here. There's no sort of kaphaja symptoms in this situation. And what typically happens is because, again, of the rise of vata and the simultaneously acting and aggravating pitta, it actually starts to diminish kapha. Okay? So in looking at that, After digestion of food, the strong Agni may also continue to break down the dhatus if food is not consumed or not available for digestion. Now, the thing about it is this Agni becomes so strong when you have Vata that is aggravating or creating this Atyagni. The Agni is so strong that even after the person consumes food, if they don't keep eating in frequent intervals, what will happen is the Agni will get something to break down. It breaks down the food. And as soon as it breaks down that food, if there's nothing remaining, it'll start to look for something else to break down. It'll start to look for something else to digest. So that's why as the Agni is apparent, it's intense, it's strong, it breaks down the food. As soon as it finishes breaking this down, it then starts to break down other healthy, normal nutrition that the body needs and the body is storing. So that's how they start to lose weight, because the body is literally, or the Agni is burning off their nourishment. It's burning off their dhatus. So that's what they say here, that if food is not available for digestion, the Agni may start to break down the dhatus as well. Okay, so thereafter the patient becomes weak, and this may also result in death. Okay, so the signs and symptoms of Atyagni. The person who has this feels relief after they consume a meal, because there's some sort of, it helps to pacify a little bit of the intensity of the Agni. The Agni gets something to do, so that they feel a little bit of relief after they eat food. After the food is digested, it may exhibit tremors. And the reason why is because once the food is digested, again, the Agni starts to waver and it becomes strong. And also it's again, what that Agni, that strong Agni is representing is the Vata that is initiating or blowing on the Agni, the Samana Vata. So as the food digests, then it can result in, afterwards it can result in tremors. It just means there's nothing in the way to keep the Vata, or keep the Vata down, keep the Agni pacified. Instead, it moves out of the way and there's nothing physical blocking it. So it starts to move very quickly again, and that's how it can result in tremors. Okay? Of course, the person will have morbid thirst, which means they feel very, very thirsty. And that's, again, because of aggravated Vata that's literally drying out their nourishment, drying out the natural moisture in the body and causing them to feel thirsty. They may have breathing difficulty or issues with breathing, and that's, again, aggravated Vata in the chest region, in the region of the Prana Vata, and so that also gets aggravated. A burning sensation in the body, this is the situation where it starts to exhibit, of course, there is excessive Agni, so that also causes the rise in body temperature, but it can also cause displacement of Pitta, which also causes abnormal heat or presence of heat in other areas in the body. Okay, and of course it can cause fainting as well. Whenever there is excessive movement of Vata, or if there is excessive aggravation of Pitta, both can cause a person to faint, because there's nothing cooling or grounding in them, and it causes excessive movement that can cause them to faint, because they cannot withstand, or they cannot control that hyperactivity. So note, these such symptoms can be seen in hyperthyroidism as well as in chronic conditions of uncontrolled diabetes. In fact, you start to see some of these symptoms in the Vataja type of prameha. So for instance, in a person who's diabetic, once they cross over to becoming a lean diabetic, they also do tend to present with some of these sort of symptoms, such as the tremors, such as the burning sensation in the body, which is basically their neuropathy. And they also start to exhibit with, of course, morbid thirst. You do find these sort of symptoms in there as well. Okay, that's why you notice that for a lean diabetic, or a chronic diabetic, they're the ones who actually need those smaller meals. So when they advise that you need to take 5 small meals per day, that is useful, but it is useful for a person who is a lean diabetic who's exhibiting signs of this type of atyagni, as opposed to an obese diabetic who does not have a higher agni. They don't need to have the 5 meals per day because that aggravates their symptoms and makes it worse, to the point where it does eventually lead to a Vataja type. Okay, but in this situation where if they are already in the Vataja type of, or the chronic condition of their diabetes, then they can also present with these type of symptoms. And basically what that just is indicating is that the body has started to flush away the normal nutrition. Vata is getting aggravated, and then Vata is presenting in this manner. Okay, it's the same thing as we see in the lean diabetic. The body is actually digesting its own nutrition and flushing it out through the urinary system. Okay, so because of aggravated Vata as well as morbid Pitta, the Agni portion which is displaced, such aggravated doshas may eventually liquefy the dhatus and digest them, hence causing depletion. So in hyperthyroidism, they are depleted as it is burnt away. In diabetes, the dhatus are liquefied and excreted through the urine, since this is the primarily a kapha condition, and the pathway of the disease is through the urinary tract. So the only difference what you find here, you find similar symptoms, but how it is happening in hyperthyroidism is in the body itself, the Agni is actually burning away the tissues, and it is burning away the dhatus and the normal dhatu nourishment or the storage of nutrition. Whereas in diabetes, it actually, that same sort of condition of aggravated Vata, Atyagni, the Agni starts to liquefy the dhatus. And since this originally was a condition that is of a kapha disorder, where it is manifesting in the urinary system and is trying to flush out the excess in the urinary system, the body somewhat sees it as liquefying the dhatus, and the dhatu, that liquefied dhatu, is excessive, so it flushes it out through the urinary system. Okay, so both of these conditions, hyperthyroidism as well as chronic uncontrolled diabetes or a lean diabetic or a Vataja type of prameha, they both present with very similar symptoms. Okay, any questions so far? Clear? Okay. Okay, so in looking at that, classically they have prescribed chikitsa for this. So if you have now, considering, let's see, you have, say here, let me show you. So you have your, Atyagni here, right? You have too much of this Agni that is increasing. And this Samana Vata that's blowing on here is what is causing this to increase. So what happens is, this is, again, the Jatra Agni here is what is responsible for representing or increasing or aggravating the other Agnis as well. So ideally, again here, same thing we want to do as we've looked at in other conditions, is we want to be able to address the issue at the source here of where it's representing or where it's manifesting, and that's at the Jatra Agni. So how do we treat this condition where you have excessive Jatra Agni? Again, not normal increase of Agni, but it is extremely excessive. Then in that, what you want to do is you want to pacify the Agni. Now, you don't want to put out the Agni, but you do want to reduce the intensity of the Agni. And some of the best ways, or the easiest ways to pacify it or to reduce the intensity, is by putting things in that take a really long time to digest. So this is the situation where Ayurveda actually does advise for people to eat meat. this is not the only condition, but this is one of those ideal conditions where they do really need to eat meat, because it takes a longer time to digest. It will also be able to provide them nutrition for their body and for their dhatus, and it will help to pacify some of the symptoms as well. It literally will be grounding. It's grounding the Agni in the sense that it is kind of pacifying the Agni. It's giving the Agni something to do, as well as it is grounding the Vata. Now, I'm not telling them to eat meat that is one big slab of meat without anything in it. But what you do is, typically the meat is processed with spices that we know that also help to pacify Vata, or get the downward movement of Vata. So does anybody remember what is the ideal spice or herb for downward movement of Vata? You can speak if you like, or you can unmute if you like.
Asafoetida?
Yes, thank you. Asafoetida. Hingu is one of the best herbs or one of the best spices for inducing downward movement of Vata. Oh, and by the way, Haya, that chapter that I was telling you about in Charaka Samhita that gives you all of the different types of herbs and spices and food that is ideal for specific conditions is Sutrasthana chapter 25. Okay, so the whole chapter, in the first beginning part of the chapter, they talk about some basic things, and then in the second half of the chapter, it's one big long list of things. So it can be like, for instance, this Hingu, or the extract or the exudate of Asafoetida, is the ideal substance for the downward movement of gas as well as the downward movement of Vata. Okay, so what you would do is you would marinate that big slab of meat with some digestive spices and make sure that there's a good chunk of Hingu in there that will also help to induce the downward movement of Vata. So ideally, this is the concept that we look at for when we want to address or intervene with these conditions. So as in the Chikitsa, they've advised, and this is also from Charaka Samhita, that as the burning fire is extinguished by water, similarly, Atyagni should be treated with the following types of food that help to pacify, or not extinguish it, meaning the sense that you get rid of it completely, but help to reduce the intensity of the fire and bring it back to normal. So what you want to use is food that is heavy to digest, or guru. Snigdha, that which is unctuous, that which is shita. Shita because it actually helps to reduce the intensity of Agni, as well as it helps to reduce some of these signs and symptoms of the aggravated Pitta. Okay, Madhura, that which is sweet. Pichila, which is slimy. Sandra, which is thick. Stira, which is stable. Pitta pacifying, and also Virechaniya. And the reason why it's Virechaniya, because again, Virechana is one of the best methods to help to pacify Pitta in the sense of causing the Pitta to move downwards, as well as it also induces downward movement of Vata simultaneously, because it causes purgation. So Virechana, or daily Virechana, anything that is purgative, is really ideal in this condition. An example of that is Haritaki. Haritaki is a herb, one of the Trifulas. Haritaki is ideal for pacifying Pitta, as well as it is Virechaniya. So it will help to cause the downward movement, or the pacification of Pitta, as well as the downward movement of Vata, or Vata Anulomana. Okay, so Haritaki is a good option for this. So even if the previous meal is not digested, now here you're going to find things that are very contradictory to what we typically hear about what we advise for diet and lifestyle. So in the Chikitsa for hyperthyroidism, here you can go crazy. The person can eat as much as they want. They can eat all the things that are contradictory that we typically tell people not to eat. And also, here you can actually advise them to eat before their previous meal is digested. Because remember, once their meal is digested, they start to feel discomfort again. So what we typically advise people to not eat before the previous meal is digested because it suppresses your Agni. Here, we want to suppress the Agni. That's why here we advise them to eat before the previous meal is digested. Okay, does that make sense? So again, even in our guidelines, there are guidelines according to who you are advising it to. If the person is a person who doesn't have hyperthyroidism or who doesn't have Atyagni, then we go with our typical advice of wait till the previous meal is digested, make sure that you don't eat heavy to digest food and all of that, because what we're trying to do there is maintain the intensity, the normal adequate amount of Agni, right? But in this situation where it's too much, we need to bring it down. So by these sort of practices, it actually helps to regulate it and bring it back down to normal. Okay, so if even if the previous meal is not digested, they can consume their meals. So in this sense, basically, they can consume those five meals per day, frequent meals per day. And for the frequent meals per day, they don't need to have small, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a small meal, and it doesn't have to be something that is easy to digest. It needs to be something that is very nutritious, that is very heavy to digest, and that also induces the downward movement of Vata. Okay? So by doing this, it does not harm the patient. In fact, it helps to pacify the condition, so that the strong Agni does not start to digest the dhatus. Another reason why they want to have a meal like this is that it doesn't give the opportunity of the Agni to start digesting the dhatus, because something is always there for the Agni to digest. Okay, so that's why it doesn't get a chance to further deplete the normal nutrition and buildup that the body does need. So if the Agni may enter into the dhatus if there is absence of food. That's why I want to make sure that they eat the frequent meals. Okay, so what are examples of the different types of food that they can eat? They can eat payasa, which is milk pudding. So those of you who've ever had this in India, you know how yummy it is. It's really good. So it's a pudding made out of milk. Usually they put some sort of rice or some sort of form of starch in it. It tends to be very sweet. So it has multiple of these sort of gunas in it. It is guru, it is snigdha, it is shita, and it is madhura. Okay? And it is also sandra. And because of the milk content and because it's sweet, it actually also helps to pacify both pitta and vata. So that's why this milk pudding is a very good idea for them to have. Krishara is a form of like khichdi, but instead of it being thin like khichdi, it's actually a much thicker, goopy type of gruel. So it's the same. Not the same consistency, can be made up with the same ingredients, but instead of making it thin and more soupy-like, you actually need to make it more concentrated. There's another thing that they made, if you all ever had a chance to go to Jaipur, which is in Rajasthan, there they have this Rajasthani cuisine where they make these wheat balls, and these wheat balls, they put them into an open fire and it cooks in the coals, and when after about I think an hour, it cooks for somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes, and then they take it out, and the outside part of course gets really hard and crusty, so you kind of cut that off or you take that off, and then the inner part, it's a big heavy dry ball of wheat, but it's very, very nourishing, and it's very heavy to digest. So for instance, people like that who do tend to have in the Rajasthan area, it's very common, or in the desert-like area, it's very common for them to have this atyagni sort of symptoms. They need to eat food like this. So what they do is they take that wheat ball and they crush it, and on top of that, they add a big spoon of melted ghee and sugar, and then they mix it up and they eat that, and that's breakfast. It's very, very heavy. It tastes good, very heavy to digest. For a regular person who doesn't have an Agni like that, that can keep you going for the whole day. That's how heavy it is. Okay, so that's an example of one of those type of foods that you can make. It's basically just a wheat ball. They have another thing that they make in India that's ragi. It's kind of like a ragi soup, but not soupy. It tends to be more like gruel. And ragi is another type of grain. It's very gummy. So they take ragi and they usually mix it with milk or with water, and they mix that and they cook it down, and it becomes very goopy, very thick, very hard. And if you eat it when it's hot, when it's still somewhat moist, then you can eat that. And that's another thing that's very heavy to digest, very nutritious, over nutritious. But for a person like this, they need this type of nutrition. Okay, so this is basically what they're looking at: the very thick, slimy, or goopy, gelatinous type of gruels. So preparations made with jaggery or with raw sugarcane. Roasted meat. Here again, they put roasted meat or fish, but it's basically indicating the type of meat. So you don't want to go for a lean meat like chicken or turkey or pork. You want to go for the more fatty type of meat. So for instance, here's a good situation where duck would be really good, or something like, of course, steak or mutton. In India, they don't tend to really eat cow's meat as much, because the reason why is because cow's meat, as when it's digested, actually tends to aggravate the doshas. And this is also mentioned, I think, in that same chapter in Charaka Samhita, or it's in the chapter after it, where they have mentioned that cow's meat is one of the worst types of meat to eat if you do have to eat meat. A better option than cow's meat or beef is mutton, because mutton is goat's meat. It tends to be it's very heavy, very nutritious, difficult to digest, or even boar's meat, but it doesn't aggravate the doshas like the cow's meat does. Okay, so a good option here would be something like mutton or boar. Okay, so for those of you who are hunters, you have all these different types of meat and game that they would have, they catch. And you can tell the difference, those who have experience with hunting for their own type of meat sources, and they know which ones are more lean and which are more heavy and more fatty. And what you're basically looking for is that kind of marbling in the meat, and that marbling in the meat is basically vasa. So when we talk about vasa as muscle fat, that's what they're talking about, that fat in between the muscle tissues, or the meat that has more amount of fat in it. Okay, so that's basically the kind of meat that they want to have. And that can be roasted, of course, or it can be made into stews or anything like that. Fish without much scales. So here's the example of fish with no scales. Fish with no scales like catfish or shark. Shark is a fish that has no scales. Or the scaleless carp. So these are just some examples that I looked up of. In the classical text, they did put shark, by the way. The catfish wasn't there, and the scaleless carp wasn't there, but the shark was given as an example. Sheep's meat. So sheep meat is lamb. Yes, lamb chops. There you go. So they can have lamb chops. Wheat gruel, which I was telling you about, just like the roasted wheat balls. Also, milk is that's processed with Jivaniya Gana. And if you look at the notes that we had in the different types of herbs that can be used for neurology, in those notes we have the long list of all the herbs included under Jivaniya Gana, or Jivaniya group of herbs. And that is milk processed with these herbs mixed with sugar and ghee. And that's basically looking at what helps to pacify vata, but in the medium of milk, that also is known to pacify pitta as well. Okay, so milk is the anupana for these ingredients. Meat soup or stew mixed with ghee, of course. Curd mixed with ghee. So this is funny because typically we look at curd and ghee mixture is viruddha, or is incompatible. But why is it incompatible? It is incompatible because it reduces your Agni and it blocks your channels. However, in this situation, that's what we want. We want to reduce the Agni, and we do kind of want to block the channels to prevent the Agni from burning off the dhatus. So for that same reason why it is viruddha, the same reason is why it is indicated in this condition. Okay, so as we always know in Ayurveda, it depends. There are no definitive rules to say this has to be done and this cannot be done, in the sense that even in our rules of viruddha and even in our situations of we tell you what is not compatible, even knowing those reactions in certain situations, it's compatible because of that incompatible reaction that it creates. We want that reaction, so we're using that, okay? We're using that same thing, that incompatibility, as a medicinal purpose. So curd or yogurt mixed with ghee and bone marrow. So you can use the majja of different types of meat. Typically they use the majja from goat meat or from the bones of the goat, or meat fat, which is vasa. So that marbling from the meat, the fat in between the muscular layers, that type of fat also can be added in. And I know that sounds kind of disgusting and a little bit probably very, very fattening or very heavy. But again, that's what we want in this situation. Okay? So other things that can be done. So if the patient takes fat-producing food when not hungry, this will keep the condition pacified. So even if they're not hungry and they're eating fattening type of food, it will actually help to reduce the condition. However, of course, it will result in them gaining weight. So this is something they probably will not be used to, but it can cause even a hyperthyroid patient to gain weight. And that in one way is good, because what it does is it does provide excessive or a good storage of nutrition in the event that for whatever reason, if they don't eat, there is something for their body or their Agni to keep working at without digesting the absolute necessary nutrition, right? So the more the body stores, the more it has for the Agni to work on. Now, in saying that, that doesn't mean that for the rest of their life, they need to keep eating a lot of food. What ideally is going to reduce this condition and bring it back to normal is actually pacifying of vata, because vata is what is causing or initiating or inducing the presentation of this disease. So if vata keeps moving downwards, if we pacify vata and keep it always in a sama avastha or in a balanced state, then that can obviously reduce the samana vata to the normal level and keep the Agni ignited but not excessive. So the downward movement of vata and keeping vata pacified is the key factor of how to completely reduce this condition. Okay? Of course, there is the factor that you do have aggravated pitta symptoms as well. So for alleviation of pitta, of course, again, purgation or virechana is considered the best. And that too, you want to do frequent purgation. So in saying that, frequent purgations or nitya virechana, whenever we're doing a consistent type of cleanse, it has to be in a milder version. It's not a one-time big cleanse to get rid of everything in one shot. What we do is we do it consistently every day and try to remove the excessive doshas little by little. So as we're doing it little by little, the body gets accustomed to that change, and then you remove a little bit more, and the body gets accustomed to that change. And so in that way, it doesn't cause an excessive reaction. What typically happens in the situation of other shodhanas or other panchakarmas is where we gather all the excessive dosha to the GIT, we excite them, and then we forcefully push them out. But what that also does is, as it is pushing it out, it then creates a vacuum. because what it has done is it has actually gotten rid of the physical matter of the dosha that we've pushed out. So as that comes out, it then creates an open space. It creates a vacuum. And what happens is, from that point onwards, vata tends to get aggravated as well because there's more space. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to do a shodhana like this, where we would push out, even in the situation of vata, where we would forcefully push out vata and then also aggravate it again. Okay? Or we can push out pitta forcefully by purgation or by virechana, and then vata will still again get aggravated and again lead into the condition without really helping it at all. So what would happen in that situation is it would probably pacify the condition temporarily, but it would still keep rising. Afterwards, it would rise back up again. So this is the reason why, instead of doing a regular one-time virechana, we would probably do a smaller dose or a smaller nitya virechana. Okay? Would castor oil be too strong to push vata too much? No, actually, castor oil is a good idea. Castor oil is good in this situation because it does have all the qualities that we're looking for. It is guru, it is slightly heavy, it is definitely pichila, it's slimy, it is sandra, it is thick, it's a much more thicker viscous oil. Of course, it is snigdha. It is shita to touch. So it is ushna virya, but it is shita to touch. Like if you ever touch castor oil, the oil itself is very cool, it's very cold. So in that sense, it does have all the qualities that we want. And to some extent, of course, it can pacify pitta as well. Since the primary dosha here is actually vata and not pitta, castor oil is a good option for pushing that, or for causing vata anulomana and for kind of inducing the downward movement of pitta instead of the upward movement of pitta. Okay? So yes, castor oil is a good option, not too strong. And in actually, what you could probably do is you could do castor oil with milk. So you get that added effect of it also causing vata anulomana, but it also pacifies pitta because milk is a great anupana for pacifying pitta. Okay, you mentioned Haditha. Would you use this instead of castor? You can, because Haditha also has the same action as castor. If you find that they have too much of this acid reflux sort of symptoms, then you probably want to use Haditha instead of the castor, because the castor might cause a little bit more of that regurgitation kind of uneasiness because of the oil factor. So Haditha might be a better option there. But if they don't have too much of that acid reflux or that sort of sour belching, the pitta isn't really moving up into their throat or into the chest, then it's okay. Then you're better off using castor oil. Okay? So you're going to have to pick and choose and see what's happening with that person. But yes, that's a good question. So Haditha, when there is more of the acid reflux symptoms, and if there are no acid reflux symptoms, then you can use castor oil. Okay? Okay. So you can also use actually milk boiled with travrit. So remember we were talking about travrit being the main ingredient in Avipattikara Churna. So the reason why Avipattikara Churna causes purgation is because of this particular ingredient. This is the Virechaniya drug, and it is one of the best Virechaniya drugs, or the best purgatives that are out there. So you can actually just use that alone and mix it with milk, or boil it in milk, and that is taken along with black or white Shamma. Shamma is, hold on a second. Shamma is a variety of herb that is available here. I'll just get back to you because I knew I wrote it down. It should be here somewhere. I'll get it for you in a second. But you can use milk boiled with turmeric and the black and white varieties of Shamma. Okay, this is after this. Using this as a Virechana. Turmeric. It is spelled in your notes. It's in page 3 under the heading B, alleviation of pitta. So TRIVRT, and the botanical name is Operculina trupitum, which of course I am not pronouncing it correctly, but I'm not good at botanical names or Latin names. Okay, so Virechana is suggested again in this condition to for both aggravation of pitta and vata, because again it helps to pacify both of these doshas and cause again vata anulomana. And this is also the reason why you want to do it daily as opposed to do it in a one-time situation where you're forcefully pushing out all of it to prevent that again rise of vata. Okay, so the pathya or the daily regimen, of course, intake of food that is sweet and fatty, that aggravate kapha, and that is heavy to digest. So in this situation, we really do want to aggravate kapha. We don't want to pacify kapha, okay? Also, they suggest sleeping during the day, especially after consumption of food. Again, what we typically advise people not to do, here they want to do that because we want to induce those changes that occurs after sleeping during the day, especially after consumption of food. Because what that does is that slows down their digestion, right? Sleeping after you eat food slows down your digestion. And here we do want to do that. We want to induce a slower digestion. And we also want to induce more excretion or more accumulation of the fluid content in the body. So because of the reasons we typically tell people not to do this, again, in this situation, we do want to induce those factors so they can sleep, okay? This is useful for hyperthyroidism, but not in diabetes. So in a diabetic patient, this again still would not be advised. The reason why is because in a diabetic patient, they already have excessive moisture, or they are converting everything in the body to excessive moisture to then be flushed out of the body, okay? So in a person who has hyperthyroidism, they don't necessarily have that issue of it being flushed out through their urine. But in diabetes, they do. So in diabetes, what the body does is it looks at all of the moisture content in the body and thinks it is too much and tries to push it out of the body. That's how the mechanism works. That's why in the beginning stages, we support that. We support the body to actually induce more amount of urination. In fact, all of the herbs that we had looked at, and some of them we'll actually look at some more because we didn't get to discuss that completely. But all of the herbs that have been advised from the Ayurvedic standpoint of managing diabetes is actually to induce proper and healthy urination. We don't want to stop the excessive urination, but we want to make sure that whatever causative factors are there, like the excessive kleda or the excessive amount of moisture or the we need to reduce the production of moisture, but whatever excessive moisture is there, that does need to be flushed out of the body. Okay, so that's why we do want to induce, and we want to keep that natural healthy mechanism that the body has created to help to manage the condition. In this situation, in diabetes, now that is the mechanism that is happening in this disease. The reason why we don't want to ask the sleep during the day in a diabetic patient is because it will increase or it will aggravate the situation of too much of moisture in the channels, therefore inducing more amount of flushing out of the natural nutrition. And the whole point of this process is actually to help to build nutrition and not get rid of it, okay? So in a diabetic patient, if you were to do this, it will just cause the nutrition to keep getting flushed out and actually could end up causing them to feel more weak. So useful definitely in a hyperthyroid issue, but this particular recommendation, not useful in diabetes, okay? And basically the success of the treatment, they say that when kapha gets aggravated and pitta as well as vata is pacified, then the Agni regains its normal state, and that actually helps to perform or cause back again a equilibrium of the dhatus. When that happens, the Agni digests food, resulting in promotion of nourishment, longevity, and strength. So that's looking at just the diet and lifestyle factor of how we want to do this. There are also formulas, herbs and formulas that work really well in this condition. And these are, again, all of the herbs and formulas that we know to be more brahmana or more nourishing. Brahmana, what does brahmana mean? Brahmana means to nourish or to induce nourishment. So in this situation, typically what we do is, if we want to induce nourishment, we increase their Agni and then we put in nourishment, right? But since this situation, there already is a very high increased Agni, then we want to induce nourishment that will help to pacify this Agni, as well as replace the nourishment in the body that this high Agni has actually started to digest and remove and deplete, okay? So in all aspects of nourishment or brahmana or even rasayana, that all works very well in this sort of condition. So some of the herbs that works really well, for instance, shatavari, okay? So this is not there in the notes, but this we will talk about. So shatavari. Shatavari is a herb that's fairly common here. You do hear about it a lot. They do tend to use this a lot for women's health and for women's reproductive related disorders. But the reason why this works here as well is because of the following factors. So the rasa, or the taste for shatavari, is madhura or sweet, and tikta, which is bitter. So the madhura factor in this is actually what really helps to pacify vata, and the tikta is what helps to pacify pitta. So it really helps, it works quite well when you have these both vata, aggravated vata, and pitta symptoms. Its guna is, it is guru, its virya is shita, vipaka is madhura, and the dosha karma is it pacifies both vata and pitta. Okay, it also does help to maintain hormone balance, which is not only, so this particular herb is not just limited to hyperthyroidism, but it does actually work very, very well in other female reproductive disorders or female endocrine function, where you do tend to have some of the vataja related symptoms. Okay, so in there, shatavari does work and does help to regulate the hormone balance and hormone function. It also actually increases, it is known very well to increase the production of breast milk, or stanya. It's known as stanya janya, which means it produces or induces production of breast milk. And if we look at that, do you remember that stanya is the upadhatu of rasadhatu? When there is healthy normal formation of rasadhatu, there is healthy normal formation of stanya, or breast milk as well. So basically what that's indicating is that this works very well in nourishment and maintaining the regular strength of Agni, as well as in the healthy normal formation and nutrition and metabolism of the rasadhatu. Okay, so for that reason also shatavari works really well. It also actually helps to relieve menopausal symptoms and reduce hot flashes. So Terry, you'll be very happy and excited if you didn't already know about shatavari. Shatavari works really well for menopausal symptoms and for hot flashes, which will be very useful for your clients, because you as you mentioned, you dealt with a lot of cases or a lot of women who are going through menopause. Okay, so shatavari works really well in these menopausal symptoms as well. It also helps to support normal function of the immune system and the digestive system. So what it does is it increases kapha and pacifies vata and pitta. So how do you use this? How do you use shatavari? Usually, actually, you can find shatavari in the form of a ghee. So you get shatavari ghrita or shatavari ghee. Okay, and how you would want to use this is either 1 to 2 teaspoons of the ghee in warm milk at bedtime. That's one of the ways you can actually use this, and it works both in pacifying the condition, as well as it is also a rasayana. It is also a rejuvenative, so it helps to rebuild and re-nourish all of the dhatus, as well as help in building of ojas and rebuilding the body's natural immune system. Okay. Another herb that can be used in this situation is Brahmi, which is one of our favorites, of course, because again, it has all of the suitable factors and qualities that is useful in this condition. So Brahmi is Bacopan Moneri. The rasa for this is Tikta Kashaya. The guna is Laghu. Virya is Shita. Vipaka is Madhura. And dosha karma is Kapha Vatahara. So yes, I know that it does actually, it does help to pacify Vata and to some extent pacify Kapha as well. But even though it can pacify Kapha, it pacifies Kapha that is aggravated. It would not necessarily get rid of Kapha that is depleted. If there's depleted Kapha, it will actually help to balance it out back to normal. Okay? So, so of course we know Brahmi has many different activities as well. It is an anti-inflammatory. It pacifies Vata. It actually is indicated even in Prameha, in all different types of Prameha, especially in Vataja type of Prameha. It works quite well. It does have a high antioxidant content, of course, relating to its rasayana effect. It is Medhya. That is one of the main known activities. That it does help to pacify psychological issues. Another reason indicating of how it helps to balance the Agni function, one of the aspects of the Agni function in the body. So another key or a little clue as to why this would work really well. Not increasing the Agni, but balancing the Agni, okay? It is also Vayasthapana, which means it actually helps to induce longevity and also to kind of rejuvenative in a sense that the person doesn't, it reduces aging, or it slows down aging. Okay, so it is Vayasthapana. It is also used in Kushta or different types of skin disorders. It is also used in Vishahara, which means it has an antitoxic effect. And also there have been studies to look at the effect of Brahmi in children who have ADHD, because since we do know that it does work in psychological dysfunction, and especially in conditions of Vataja-related psychological disorders, Brahmi is one of the best indicated drugs or herbs for that. So there have been studies that have been done in children who have ADHD who take Brahmi, and it has been shown to be effective in reducing the intensity of their symptoms. No, not only in children, of course. There are lots of studies looking at Brahmi in psychological dysfunction and many different types of psychological disorder. I would suggest, again, if you guys have time, please do do the extra reading or do some of the research on these herbs. And there's so much information out there. Look at Google Scholar. If you do get the Indian articles, which do tend to have a lot of Sanskrit terms in them, don't shy away. Still print out the article and see if you can't decipher. Most of the Sanskrit words, by now you would have heard them, or you have the lists for them, because we have talked about most of the Sanskrit words already. Okay? So if you find the articles that have been printed or written in India, please do read them, because those are different types of works that have been done by postgraduate scholars who do this as their thesis work, or they are doing work in helping their guides in doing different sort of departmental, smaller research. But what it really indicates is looking at trying to produce numbers for the clinical effects that we know or we have observed to work in our patients. So definitely look it up. There's been lots of studies done on Brahmi and its effect on psychological disorders, as well as Alzheimer's, as well as all sort of neurodegenerative disorders. Okay. So how you would take Brahmi here also, you would want to get Brahmi ghee or Brahmi ghrita. Ghrita is the Sanskrit word for ghee. Okay. So better off to look for the formula as Brahmi ghrita first instead of Brahmi ghee, because sometimes what people do is they get Brahmi, or they get an extract of Brahmi, they put it into the regular ghee formulation that they're making at home, and they call that as Brahmi ghee. However, Brahmi ghrita is a slightly different formula, and when we get to our medicine making weekend, you will see how different the process actually is. Okay, so you can get Brahmi ghrita, and how it can be, it's consumed either as 1 to 2 teaspoons, again with warm milk at bedtime, or you can even get the Brahmi capsules, and that is 2 capsules taken with warm milk, again at bedtime. Okay, so these are 2 different really good herbs that can be used in this condition. Of course, you can also even use, this is an actual indication for where you would want to use Chyavanprasha as a medicinal formula, not just for increasing your immunity, or not just for the regular daily use, but Chyavanprasha actually has medicinal properties that are used for specific disease conditions. And this is one of those instances where it can be used. Okay, so it is used for the purpose of it being a rasayana, that it actually helps to rebuild and nourish the dhatus, as well as helping to nourish and rebuild and increase ojas, as well as, since it's a nutritive, it is a rasayana formula, it actually is slightly, not very heavy to digest, but it is slightly heavy to digest. So it's more nutritive in value. So because of that, it does help to reduce the intensity of Agni as well. So how you would want to take Chyavanprasha here, you want to take it as 1 teaspoon after food, either 2 or 3 times per day, depending on how intense their symptoms or their hyperactive Agni is. Okay, so this is a good situation where rasayanas really do help. If you want to opt for treatments, different types of body work, here also body work such as Shirodhara works really well. And here you want to use, for the oils, you can actually use something like Shirabala Taila. And this is one of the oils, by the way, that we had looked at in the neurology module, because again, this is very nourishing. It is great for pacifying Vata as well as Pitta, and it really does help to slow things down. It will help to reduce the anxiety, the nervousness, the tremors. So this is something that's really nice, that will be very soothing for someone who has hyperthyroidism, really helping to ground Vata in the neurological plane. Okay, so you can use Kshitabala, or if not, of course, here Narayana Tela works really well. Narayana which is very similar, of course, Mahanarayan or Narayan Tela. Both of these can work very well because both are actually very, very Brahmana or very nourishing in nature. Okay, that's the reason why it works very well in this sort of Vata condition. So here also you can use that. If you wanted to, you can also do, of course, Abhyanga with the more heavy oils. If you're really adventurous, you can do the body work where they cook the rice. Shashtika Shali Pindasweda. Shashtika Shali Pindasweda. This is there, of course, again, we described this, or we had talked about this in the neurology module. So this is where they cook the red rice. Red rice is cooked in milk and bala kashaya, and then it's made into a paste, and that is put into a potli or a poultice. That poultice is again heated up in milk and bala kashaya, and that sort of very moist, very nourishing poultice is used to do swedana on the patient's body. And what that does is, again, it helps to pacify vata as well as pitta, because it is in a milk medium. It helps to pacify both vata and pitta, as well as it actually helps to provide an external form of nourishment. So from all aspects of what you're doing, your treatment is nutritive, the medium or the medicine that you're using is nutritive, the procedure is nutritive. So in all aspects, the person is actually getting a form of nourishment, and it's aimed at pacifying both of the doshas. So here is actually another indication of where we would want to use the red rice cooked in milk and bala. Okay, and that they use that as a poultice for applying, you know, the percussion type of massage, as well as they squeeze out the paste from the poultice, and that is also applied on the body towards the end of it. They apply the paste on the body, and then after leaving it on for it to kind of partially dry, and then they scrape it off, and then the person takes a nice warm shower at the end. And within, you really do see very quick results with that, in the sense of how it can replace the lack of nourishment in their body. Okay, it does tend to show up. The results of this shows up very quickly. Okay, so this is basically how we can look at the treatment and understanding of hyperthyroidism from the Ayurvedic perspective. Okay, so do we have any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
I have a client who I talked to you about her. She had the HHT with the bleeding in the nose. That was her main problem. She's doing much better, but she also has her diagnosis is nodules and an enlarged thyroid. I just saw her, and I'm actually going to be seeing her again. She's got all these symptoms you're describing of hyperthyroid. So I'm even wondering, how would you discern? She's got an enlarged thyroid. Could she possibly have, I don't know, hyperthyroid? She's got very high pitta, but her vata is in the sky, and she's skinny mini.
That's exactly what it is.
Palpitations and tremors. And she's doing the opposite. She's vegetarian. She's like eating so light. And at first I gave her the takra to do also. She was doing that for a while, and she liked it. But she did stop that, so I'm seeing that's probably not a good thing for her to be doing.
No, actually, she could take the takra without taking out a lot of the fat. She can leave most of the fat in. Okay. Because for her, she needs the fat. Yeah. So she could still do takra, and just to actually make it easier on her and tell her, why don't you just put this amount of water and blend it up and just take out a little bit of the foam and leave the rest. So let her take that fat, because that's actually useful for her. Remember, yeah, in the type of food that we've described, here curd is indicated, yogurt is indicated. So she can absolutely have the yogurt and with the fat and just have it a little bit diluted, or she could even eat just regular yogurt. These are situations where all the things we typically advise people not to have, they can have. because their Agni is so strong, it's going in the opposite manner. It's not allowing for any form of nutrition, and it's also digesting and burning off whatever the body has stored and that needs it. So we need to try and push in as much nutrition as we possibly can.
She had a thick yellow coating on the back of her tongue this time too. Her tongue's gotten better, though she had a lot of red spots, which were the H for the HHT. That's clearing up. It's getting better. And she had a white coating for a while, and that's actually gotten better. But then last time I saw her now, there was more of a Pitta coating.
Yeah. And that's the reason why you really need, she needs every kind of milk product you can think of. Okay. Any kind of milk product that she likes, let her have it, and let her have as much as she wants. So if she wants to eat cheese, go for it. If she wants to eat cream cheese, go for it. If she wants to eat yogurt every single day, absolutely, she can have it.
Well, I'll have to see if I can convince her. She's, very vegetarian, and I had her making bone broth. She was doing a little bit of bone broth, and even that she said she would start it again because she stopped it, and I told her to continue with that.
Okay, so if she doesn't want to do, because this can be a challenge when it is someone who's vegetarian.
She do dairy. She will do dairy because she
will do dairy. Then let her have
an omelet, and she had some cheese, and I said, don't do the cheese with the eggs. So,
no, for her, she can.
She can? Okay.
She can. She can have as many omelets and as much cheese loaded up. Yes.
Okay.
Typically, like I said, this is Viruddha.
Okay.
Or this is Viruddha because what it does is it pacifies the Agni and it blocks the channels. Okay. But for that reason, we want to induce that effect in her. So she can actually have these things. Now, you do want her to have it. Do warn her that she may start to gain weight. Because remember in the third page, it said if they eat fatty food, they may gain weight.
Yeah.
It won't be an unhealthy weight.
Yeah.
It would be a weight that her body really needs. So warn her that she may gain weight, but that's a good thing.
I was wondering when you were talking about the hypothyroid and you showed a diagram of the thyroid pressing on, like it's enlarged, her thyroid's enlarged. And the diagram showed it pressing on the arteries. And I was wondering, could that be what's giving her the palpitations and problems? Or is it the she hasn't been diagnosed as hyperthyroid necessarily. I don't know. She
doesn't need to be diagnosed with it because even the fact that she has the swollen glands, in Ayurveda, the Galaganda description, the only one that has the swollen, huge glands is actually Vataja, which is very similar to goiter. So you might want to check to see if she has enough of that iodine intake as well, which is one of the main reasons why people do develop a goiter. So, for instance, is she a recent immigrant or is she from another country?
No. But she's taking some supplements from one that John Douillard has for thyroid. I suggested
Is it a thyroid that is reducing? Because that will do the opposite.
Right. So I'll double check.
That reduce it. She actually needs, so Gugalus are maybe not the best for her.
Okay.
Because if it has...
Should she take iodine? Should she take iodine?
She can, but I mean, iodine is just one aspect of it because what iodine does is it helps to boost the metabolism. But I mean, you can boost the metabolism by increasing, by managing her Agni and by regulating her Agni. It's not necessary because there is a certain amount of iodine in the food that she's going to be eating anyway. So just make sure that you know that she does have some amount of iodine, but she doesn't have to take extra iodine. So like for instance, you can mention that she should have like iodized salt. So she's getting a daily intake of a certain amount of iodine. But even the excessive amount of iodine can cause to aggravate Pitta as well.
Okay.
So you don't want to give her any more than a regular daily intake, which is typically substituted with iodized salt. That's more than enough than you need on a daily basis. And in fact, she can probably have some amount of salty things as well. Of course, she does have aggravated pitta symptoms, but she does have a lot of aggravated vata symptoms.
Yeah,
and that will help to clear it out. What you can do to kind of pacify the local swelling is you can actually use the rasna powder and either make a poultice of the rasna powder and heat that up and apply it on, or you can even do the rasna powder and just mix it in some warm water and apply it on as a very thick paste, and that will help to somewhat reduce that swelling as well as reduce some of the pain from it.
I don't think she has pain, but
she may not have pain here, but she'll have pain somewhere else.
Oh, okay.
She most likely has pain somewhere else in her body.
What was interesting, she also takes my yoga class, and she hasn't been coming, but what I noticed, and when you were talking about Samana Vayu, it clicked, that she has a tendency, even when she's not doing yoga, but in general, she holds her chin like this up, and she wasn't doing any forward bending because of her nose bleeding. So she's not... Samana Vayu wasn't getting pacified because she wasn't doing any forward bends, and she wasn't pulling this, so the heat is just going up, and I felt it was
if you remember, Gerard actually was describing this exact same thing. He said when it is hyper, you find that they tend to look upward.
Yeah. So I just gave her to do breathing with moving her head up and down, and to do some shoulder stand and bridge, and so she's doing this instead of always doing this.
Well, the shoulder stand might be a little bit challenging for her right now. But first try to ground her vata and get it back in its own domain. So it needs to keep moving downwards. So for her, really things that, like for instance, definitely some form of ghee. I would definitely suggest some form of ghee. If she's a vegetarian, then she needs to get food that is extremely nourishing, extremely grounding, and put ghee in everything. Put ghee in all of her food. She can have nuts. She can have like lots of cashews. Maybe not almonds so much. Almonds are okay, but they're not as grounding as cashews. Cashews are a whole lot more heavy. So let her have lots of cashews. And even though we typically say that these aggravate vata, but they do actually ground vata because they are very heavy. And that's what we want for this situation. Okay. So we want her to have as much as that as possible. She would really, if you're doing Shirodharas, she would really benefit from Shirodhara.
She did one. She's been coming for Abhyanga, and she doesn't want to spend the money for Morch, I think. But I'll tell her that you said she should do it.
But what you can do is, if you're doing it, she needs a very thick oil.
Okay.
Don't use a thin oil, not a coconut oil. It needs to be a very thick sesame oil or like a Mahanarayan oil. Even
for Shirodhara, would you use Maharayan for Shirodhara?
Yeah, for her, yes.
Okay.
If you have that, like, because Shira Balatela can be a little bit expensive, and it may be you may not have enough to do a whole Shirodhara because you need more.
I have the Banyan Shirodhara, and I have sesame, and I have Mahanarayan oil.
I think the Mahanarayan oil would probably be the better choice for her. And also, if you're doing Abhyanga for her, do that with Mahanarayan oil, or do it. Even you could actually probably do it with ghee. This is a situation where ghee is typically very, very heavy on the skin, but it's very nutritious and it pacifies vata and pitta. So in her situation, since you may not be able to get some of the other oils that are really vata pacifying, put the ghee on. Slather her with ghee. And yes, she will walk out smelling like a big ball of ghee. But when she, if you can do a steam tent, or if you can follow up the ghee with some form of swedana before she leaves, she will feel that grounding effect immediately.
Okay. I used the Sharada Vata oil last time.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yes, I am,
Yeah,
and it's quite good. It
yeah.
is quite good. So let us know how she's
Thank
doing,
you.
because it sounds like she's a perfect case study for this condition.
She's been and she's really compliant for the most part. She's really really following. She's been following for a while because she's seeing improvement. You know, we went very slowly, and she's seeing improvement.
Does she have any menstrual issues as well?
Well, she went through menopause, and that's when
Okay.
all of this started about 8 years ago.
Okay.
And she moved at that time too. So we're, you know, Gainesville's a little damp, and it was a different environment. And the menopause, she had a very hard time of it, and she's just like feels that aggravated everything.
Yeah, definitely lots of nutrition, every kind of dairy product you can think of, and even her treatments should be something that is very grounding.
I might be able to get her to eat meat. It is possible. I might.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, if she can, that'd be wonderful. But some people, they're not ready for that, and you don't want to push her.
Yeah.
I think once she starts feeling even more, and it seems like you're already on the way to you know, creating that change. You've already created quite a bit of a positive change with her. But let her get back a little bit more on a regulated, that nourishment kind of diet, and like heavy nourishment diet. And if you want, you can choose any one of these herbs to give her.
She's already taking a bunch. She's doing shatavari. She's doing she's doing Chyawanprash.
Okay, good, perfect. Then if she's already on that, then perfect.
She's been doing it in milk, so maybe I'll tell her to get the brahmi and the ghee, or one of them in ghee too.
No, if she's taking it in milk, that's fine. That's fine. As long as she's taking it and she's comfortable with that, then that's okay.
Yeah, I think she is. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for volunteering that. That was perfect.
It was very perfect.
Great. So do we have any other questions? In hypothyroidism, is there daily virechana, for example, if you are using? Yes, actually there is. Even in hypothyroidism, there's daily virechana there. But you notice the difference in the virechana dravyas. One is virechana for the purpose of moving down. Even castor oil does help to increase the agni, but it is more in an oily, viscous medium. Whereas in hypothyroidism, where we do want to increase the agni and we do want to induce a daily virechana, there it is aimed at actually increasing the agni and digesting ama, and is in a lighter medium. It is in the form of a decoction instead of in the form of an oil. So one is more grounding, as in the case of castor oil being more grounding, as well as still doing the same effect, as opposed to Gandharvahastadi Kashaya, which is a decoction, still grounding, but increasing agni and digesting ama. Okay? So yes, we do have a very similar objective of what we're doing in treatment, but one is more grounding than the other. Good question. Thank you. So for individuals with Tikshna Agni, can a lighter version of this treatment work for them? Yes. For a person who has Tikshna Agni, yes. So in a person who has Tikshna Agni, you could do either the Haditha ki churna, which is a much milder version of a virechana dravya, or you can do like smaller doses of castor oil. Because if you notice, for certain people who have Tikshna Agni, or if someone is not really gaining weight, castor oil isn't very aggressive in inducing virechana, unless the person has a soft koshta. Only if the person has a mridu koshta, then castor oil really does induce purgation. Otherwise, for the other types of koshtas, depending on the dose, castor oil can't, only with a higher dose can it really induce, like, you know, forceful amounts of elimination. Otherwise, if you take smaller doses, all it does is it induces bowel movement, but it won't necessarily induce a purgation. Okay, so yes, for somebody who has Tikshna Agni, you can do something milder, like Haditha ghee powder with milk, or a small dose of castor oil with milk. In both cases, it would help. The Tikshna Agni, a lighter version of the hyperthyroid diet, yes, they're also a lighter version, absolutely. Yeah. Should I suggest Virechana to her? You can if you feel like it, but see how much weight, if she's gaining weight or not. Because if she's not gaining any weight, then maybe she doesn't need the Virechana yet. Okay? But if you feel like, for instance, if she's getting constipated and if her body's holding on to the mala, which may also be the case with her, for instance, if she has aggravated vata, and if the vata is moving upwards, then yes, most likely she's going to have constipation as well. So if she does have constipation, if she's not going once every day, or she's going once every 2 to 3 days, then yes, you do want to do the Virechana to make sure that the bowels are moving down, vata is moving downwards, so yes. So it all depends on her bowel movements. She is constipated, right? Okay, so yes, so then you can do the Virechana. And for her, Virechana with castor oil would be preferred. Okay? You're welcome. Okay. So good. Oh, we went beyond our time, but that's good. This is a really nice discussion. Thank you so much for all your input and participation. So this is basically it for our topic of hyperthyroid. Please, of course, if you have any questions, otherwise, or if you have cases like this, please just send it in, and it would be great for us to discuss it as a group and share our inputs and insights on it. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a very good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.
Sweet dreams, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.